Hello and welcome to Leading on Logistics, the executive membership podcast from Logistics UK. Mike Young back with you as we bring you insights from and analysis of the country's logistics sector. In this latest instalment, we'll be focusing on AI and automation in logistics. It's a big part of the latest Logistics UK Innovation Insight reports.
With the advent of emerging technologies such as AI, digital twins, robotics and deep learning, and the prospect of autonomous vehicles, the potential for innovation to have a transformative effect on the sector is now greater than ever.
That's Logistics UK's President Phil Rowe with his assessment in the foreword of this new report. So let's take a closer look. To our guests we go then. Gemma James is Director of Partnerships and Digital Services at Logistics UK. Earlier this year, Gemma chaired the inaugural AI and Automation in Logistics conference in London. Toby Mills is the founder of and chief executive at Entropy. That's an AI company working with operators, decision makers across critical infrastructure around the likes of transportation, ports, and energy. Toby was at that AI and Automation in Logistics conference back in March, and both Gemma and Toby have contributed to this new Innovation Insight report. Thank you both for being there for us. Gemma, if I come to you first, can you paint a picture of something AI that is happening now that is changing or will change the logistics sector?
It's actually quite hard to just narrow down one. There was so much going on, and chairing that event opened my eyes to just how much we're already immersed in it. There were so many fascinating insights and conversations, some of which, AI has been impacting everything in the supply chain for quite some time. But I suppose in answer to your question, the predicted demand forecasting, I think, is quite phenomenal. That ability for AI to not just analyze historical data, and that could be anything from, market trends, forecasting the inventory side of things, but even historical data around weather patterns and that kind of thing can impact on sort of forecasting. And that way that it takes the information and can predict the demand for the future based on so many different factors. I think that's incredible.
Now, Toby, at the logistics conference that you were at, you were highlighting examples there of where AI-related solutions have been brought in at the ports of Dover and at Felixstowe. Can you just put some meat on the bones for us of what you were talking about there?
Sure, yeah. So Entropy is building AI systems to help operators and strategic decision makers essentially make better decisions in these really complicated operational contexts. And principally, that comes down to, talking directly to what Gemma's just said in terms of trying to predict what's going to happen next. So it's about trying to predict the future. So at the Port of Dover, we worked with them for a couple of years, helping to predict traffic flows to the Port of Dover, which is, of course, a key challenge for them. And those predictions were helping operators to essentially understand what's going to happen in the next 6 hours. And, that's quite reasonable to understand that 6 hour preemption, I suppose, helps people to make better operational decisions in the moment. With Harwich Haven Authority, who are the port authority that support the Port of Felixstowe and other ports within their jurisdiction, it's really looking at resource constraints in relation to the berthing of, quite frankly, enormous container vessels coming into the Port of Felixstowe. So if you can imagine the complexity of that operation, there's lots of stakeholders involved. So you've got towage service providers, you've got pilotage, obviously, you have the terminal operations. So you've got lots of stakeholders that are trying to work together to support a common customer. And actually, lots can go wrong. So being able to predict future resource constraints helps respective stakeholders to get ahead of those issues and make better decisions. So that's very much where we are and where we're talking from, the perspective we have, I suppose. And it's quite different, I suppose, to some of the other AI use cases, which are more centered around kind of content generation or the automation of work.
A question for both of you, but Toby first. These innovations clearly being brought in already, they're coming in all the time. Would you say the logistics sector as a whole is embracing this taking more of a wait and see sort of approach, or maybe even a head in the sand sort of approach? I guess it all depends which particular individual, organisation or business you're working with. Toby first.
So the organizations I've just mentioned, very, very forward thinking, absolutely embracing the technology, not without its challenges, because you've got lots of different parts of an organization, and different parts of an organization will look at these sorts of innovations somewhat differently. So that has to be acknowledged. But generally, yeah, the organizations that we've had the pleasure, I suppose, of working with, very, very forward thinking organizations. I think more generally across the logistics sector, I think there is some hesitation just around what does this actually mean. So there's a lot of hype with AI. I was talking to someone yesterday and talking about the kind of hype cycle and the nature of markets within that hype cycle. So I think we've very much gone through the anything that says AI is amazing and is going to get budget to actually we now need to see proper business cases, justifiable return on investment, and I think that's where the hesitation is coming from. So it's not so much about being head in the sand about AI. I think the industry knows that's where things are going. I just think it's a kind of careful adoption path where people want to understand what it means for them.
Completely agree, and that careful adoption path is something that I resonate with completely, because I think the last thing that anyone wants is sort of the AI regret and the pivot. And it has been seen with certain companies who either have stuck their head in the sand and haven't done anything with it, and as a result, didn't have the policies in place and have seen considerable threats, both from IP being uploaded into open source solutions that has sadly data and critical business information has then been put out into the public domain because they haven't had the controls around the AI use. That is a big risk. So I think having that awareness of it, both in terms of what it's capable of, but also the threats alongside it. So having the guardrails in place is just as important as having an open mind as to what it could potentially add value to or solve. It's been seen, with other companies out there, and I'm not going to name names, but there has been one or two who have significantly reduced human headcount and then have had to pivot on that decision because they've needed to restore human empathy. For example, replacing humans with chatbots can work very well, but equally, then all of a sudden, when you see a huge dip in customer satisfaction, service quality, or whatever it may be, you then have to sort of reverse on that decision. The same can be said around the guardrails around, if you're going to utilize AI, what are you going to utilize and where, and the restrictions around your teams for how it's used, and making sure that you know everything from a cybersecurity perspective to also making sure that you have a solution that is in-house and everything goes into that in-house solution rather than ad hoc uses by different teams who might be doing it completely innocently, but they don't realize that by asking ChatGPT or whoever to summarize a management report or accounting information can lead to some quite worrying threats with public information, etc., being available that wouldn't normally be the case. So I think the guardrails and being aware of what can happen is equally as important as getting excited about it.
Well, let's look at the two big issues you were raising there. Was the security side of things, Gemma, first of all. We'll get on to the headcount, the jobs thing, which is a vital component of what we're talking about here in a second. The security side, you were talking there about open AI. For the uninitiated, essentially, what you're worried about is essentially somebody pumping in really quite confidential minutes from a meeting or accounts or whatever, and then pumping this into the wider world of artificial intelligence, where essentially you're releasing it out for public consumption, in essence. This is about careful use of the technology. It is perfectly possible that artificial intelligence can help you in a closed sense where that information isn't being shared with the wider globe.
Yes, exactly that. So, and it can be something quite innocent, but it could be someone in marketing. There's going to be a new product release or a new way of doing route optimization or a new way that's going to impact on the supply chain. And someone in marketing has thought, oh, I know, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to improve this information in relation to this product release that's going to happen whenever. And all of a sudden, that competitive information gets released prior to a controlled process. That that kind of thing could be very innocently done if you didn't have the explicit controls and company policies, etc., around what can be used and when, what can't be used, training people as to what should be used, and obviously what shouldn't be used, as is equally important. Putting that around it is really important in training people, as is the prompts and the guidance, etc., that people should be asking their in-house solutions to get the right answers and to get to where they need to be. Because you do need to be trained on the questions and the prompts that you should be asking in order to get to the result that you want to get to. We utilize AI quite comprehensively within Logistics UK, and we've had some brilliant results and some really good projects. But we've had to manage those, projects very well, ensure that there hasn't been project creep, ensure that people are sort of trained on what the outcomes, what we're looking to achieve, etc. So there's huge opportunities for AI in all logistics businesses, but I think you have to be realistic and you have to have the right people and the right engagement at all levels.
And Toby, this is really where you and Entropy kind of comes in, because you've got to hold the hands of firms, organizations that are learning, and they're going to need to learn and take your advice on board so that everyone feels this is where we can make astonishing progress, but we can do so in a very secure, safe way.
Exactly. And as I said before we sort of came on air, that there are lots of different types of AI, and I think that has to be recognized. And the way we look at things at Entropy is we take a sort of system of systems approach. So we do use language models, and we do use things like Claude and GPT and Gemini, but we use them as orchestrators. So we do not. There's a whole bunch of reasons as to why we do that, but security is at the heart of it. So, naturally, we're combining artificial intelligence with often proprietary data to provide that decision intelligence to operators. And it's really important, as you've discussed, that proprietary data doesn't go to it's not just completely opened up to public domain. So there's very, very key things or critical things that you can do when architecting these types of systems to ensure that the language model gets what it needs, but it doesn't have unfettered access to that data. There are anonymization techniques. I can't pronounce that word. There's certain techniques that you can use to make sure that data can't necessarily be used in a harmful way. And then there are other types of guardrails where you simply don't want language models predicting things. They're not very good at it. They hallucinate. There are certain challenges with doing that. So we very much use the language models as the orchestrators, and then we use other types of AI. There are different types of generative AI. They don't have to be language models, but there are statistical, forecasting, predictive models that sit within the network and do specific jobs. And so it's very, very important to understand what you're trying to achieve and therefore what type of AI you need to achieve that goal. It's important to understand the different types of AI, what they're good at and what they're not. And it's important to make sure that the architectures of these systems protects the underlying data and the sovereignty of that data for the respective organizations that are using it. And of course, there is a massive education piece. But the final comment I'll make on this point is right now we're in the finding ROI of AI stage, right? So there's a lot of organizations that are pushing the boundaries of what their organizations are doing. They're adopting these technologies. But I would say a lot of that adoption is still experimental. They're still trying to find the unlock. At some point on the horizon, organizations are going to find that unlock, right? With the help of organizations like us or with other organizations that are in the market, they are going to find the unlock. And that's going to bring a different type of pressure and a different risk to the market. Right now, everyone can take their time. They can have these plans. They can deliver the training. They can carefully adopt these technologies. But if your competitor has just found a huge unlock with AI, the pressure is going to come for your organization to catch up. And that, unfortunately, is when people start taking a little bit more risk and they start trying to accelerate as opposed to protect. And I think that's potentially the big risk on the horizon. When some of these technologies really do start to demonstrate very, very big and very, very tangible AI, and we're starting to see it, in the space of language models. If you look at what's happening between Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, what guardrails? They are competing for the most powerful models because they are all gazumping each other every 2 or 3 months in terms of the power of the underlying models. And you've seen it firsthand there. At that point, unfortunately, security, privacy, concern is taken over by ambition. And so that's the thing I think the logistics sector and more broadly, business more generally has to be mindful of.
I was going to pick up on that. So one thing I was going to say, I think what Toby has said is correct. The acceleration is happening quicker than probably anyone could have predicted. However, the cyber element is a considerable risk for our industry in particular because, our industry is quite unique in that when everything is working well in logistics, you don't notice it because it's seamless. The deliveries are coming through, the goods are getting to where they need to get to. When it breaks, and we've seen some huge examples over the last 18 months, if not longer, where, cyber attacks have brought down entire supply chains that has even affected GDP, for example. It is huge when these cyber attacks happen on certain scales. That is the worry. Wheels cannot turn, products cannot get delivered, etc., etc. So I think we do also have to be aware of the cyber threat around this. We as Logistics UK work very closely with the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group, not the shortest name in the world, but we'll call it NCR CG. And they are a strategic collaboration between the police, government, and also the private sector and some academia as well. And some of the support that they are giving to our members and to the wider logistics industry is absolutely fantastic. They can offer penetration testing, they can offer ethical hacking, they can offer lots of different things to try and support people and offer a little bit of the sort of guidance, guardrails, alongside some of the, policies that's involved in Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001 and all these other things. There is no guarantees clearly, but there is some support out there to help people feel more informed in their choices and that they do have the backup plans in the event of something happening. And I think cyber resilience is exactly that. You can never 100% guarantee that you won't come under a cyber attack. In fact, it's more likely that it's going to happen at some point than it won't. So I think Toby is completely right. Acceleration all the way, and we're seeing it, and it's giving huge opportunities for our sector in particular, but also making sure you do have your backup plans and you have everything else, and your escalation and your crisis plans in the event of is also giving operators some peace of mind. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Thank you.
So let's say that this sort of technology and AI improvement is brought into a particular organization. It is done responsibly, it's done ethically, in a security-minded way. This is coming. Let's look at the job situation. How would, Gemma, do you think, a warehouse role, a typical warehouse role in the logistics sector, how is that going to change through the advent of AI?
I think it already has, to be quite honest with you. If you look at our industry as a whole, everything from sort of the planned versus actual, automated warehouse management, dynamic route optimization, everything's already been or is being impacted by AI. So in relation to the specific job piece, firms are adapting to it already. They're embracing it, whether it's, robots to speed up packing, sorting, picking, all that sort of thing, or even AI powered drones. That is happening in certain areas of the world at the moment. It's about working alongside the humans. So there's still going to be humans needed for the planning and for the management and some of the controls around it. But can these robots do heavy lifting, work 24 hours a day, reduce workplace injuries? Yes, they genuinely can, and that's being done already. It's about the human side that goes along with it, how that's managed, etc., in the right way, and the other opportunities that those jobs give. You cannot open, I was going to say open a newspaper, but that shows my age. You can't open a web page and look at the recent news. Every day there's some firm cutting jobs because of AI use. predominantly the manual input, data inputting, the back office type jobs. But it's about redistributing those skills to other areas with new roles alongside AI. That's what I believe it's about.
And Toby, we are talking about a revolution. It is the latest revolution we're all going to go through in the same way as we all watched the birth of the internet 30 odd years ago and its impact on our daily lives there, the very way we're recording this. And all three of us are in different places in the United Kingdom. All of this is a revolution of a sort. When we talk about the AI revolution, classically, a revolution will take jobs, yes, but then new jobs will be created as well. Sometimes jobs we can't even foresee yet.
I agree, and that's my position. My position on this, and has been for a very long time. My overarching view is that when I don't know what the timeline is, but this will ultimately increase productivity and increase job creation. Entropy's position on this. So just speaking directly to the job cuts point, I suppose, and that is happening. I completely agree. I think Entropy's position. So our role within critical infrastructure is to support human operators make decisions. Our position is that the ultimate decision is always made and will always be made by a human operator because of the level that we're operating in. But I mean, it plays into the security point as well. The security is multifaceted in so many different dimensions. And one of the threats with AI is that you start outsourcing every single decision to an AI, and humans inherently start to become less smart or less sharp. So our position is always there is a human handoff, and that human handoff is really, really important. So that is our position on this. But for these systems to start moving towards being able to improve the decision making that they can, or improve the intelligence that they're providing to those human operators, some really amazing and fascinating things are happening. So if I just give you a minute on this. So the way ours and other systems are working is, like I said, it's a system of systems. So you have data and statistical models feeding into an orchestration layer, which is typically driven by a language model. Now, language models are trained on huge amounts of knowledge, and they are knowledge bases. You ask them a question, they seem to know the answer. The knowledge trees that we're creating by linking data and predictive models within an organization is also creating knowledge. But knowledge is not enough to become a active participant in operations. So AI has to sit behind a computer screen, or it has to sit behind a chat window. Our mission within Entropy, what we're aiming to do is create tools that actually proactively communicate with operators, still keeping the human at the absolute center of the decision-making process, but proactively communicating with them. And that requires something else. That requires experience. It requires a whole raft of other human emotions, but the key one we're focusing on is experience. So can we actually build technologies and techniques to capture what's happened in the past, what's happened over the past 6 hours, and build that into the decision making workflow? And that's what we're calling experience. And when you're actually working with these tools and seeing stuff like that being developed, it's very, very easy to write down on a piece of paper and say, every single human job is going to go, because these things honestly are getting incredibly good at a lot of things. But the real question over replacement, I don't think just comes down to capability. It comes down to judgment. It comes down to responsibility. It comes down to, as I was speaking to you the other day, Mike, it comes down to liability. There's loads and loads of different aspects that I think protect human decision making, and ultimately, I think this revolution will result in more human jobs due to increased productivity.
You actually, in that conversation, Toby, that we had the other day in advance of this recording, you actually reminded me of a rugby union legend's quote, Brian O'Driscoll, that
Yeah.
actually sits very well with this, which is around AI is going to do so much for us in terms of interpretation of data, but that interpretation is very often going to be done by a human being. The quote was,
The quote was, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. I think he says wisdom, but I'll replace wisdom with experience is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. But that's the point, right?
Completely agree, and I think picking up on that's the human value, it's the experience, it's the empathy, it's the knowledge, the touching, the doing, the feeling, and all those different things. That's where the human value is, and I think Toby expressed it very well in not just in the quote, but what he said in the lead up to that the decision making and the judgmental piece is where the human value lies. Equally, I think being able to have information at fingertips to make critical business decisions and make them quicker, that's absolutely integral to the future path of AI. Also, with the digital twins and the planning, etc., having some other options. So if something does go wrong, you know what your B, C, D opportunity looks like because you can pivot quicker because you've got a plan versus actual. You've got an actual experience of, okay, this has happened. Let's make this decision based on these facts, and we know we're pretty much going to get this outcome. That is being utilized very strongly and will be even more going forward, I think. So we're already used to lean operating models and all the rest of it, and that's going to become even more so, I think, with the advent of AI. It's quite an exciting time. So, is there people out there who need to be worried about their jobs? Yes, probably. That's the world that we live in, but it's about adapting to the new opportunities that are going to arise.
Gemma, I'm glad you mentioned digital twins, digital twinning, because that's actually the chapter in this new report that Toby's contributed to. In a nutshell, Toby, let's just define what digital twinning is. I mean, the way I interpret it is this is where a system can run alongside whatever's running in your organization at the moment, but you can test a future plan in advance. You can assess something when it's up and running. And that can be so vital if you're bringing in new processes, knowing that the impact of what these processes are going to have on your organization in advance.
That's correct. Yeah, I think the official line I use, or the official line I use, the line I use, is that a digital twin is a digital representation of a physical thing, process, or system. That's how I always think about it. So yeah, it's a digital replica, but digital twin is a broad church as well as AI. So there's lots of different aspects to digital twinning. Some digital twins are, um, immersive environments. So it's a complete virtual representation or digital representation of an experience, right? That could be a digital twin. BIM software or CAD, computer aided design. People will be familiar with these sorts of things. That's where you can sort of create a replica and start poking it and testing it and so on. There's particular modeling classes that use things like numerical modeling and physics-based modeling, which create mathematical models effectively of that environment, and that allows you to simulate certain decisions. And then more recently, digital twinning has become more data-driven, and that's the area that Entropy sits. So this means that real data is being fed into a digital world and is being put together in a way that represents the objects that data is coming from. And so we use the concept of digital twin essentially to make sense of lots of disparate data sources, and lots of predictive models. It's enabled us to lead on a concept called micro modeling, which is how we accurately predict things that are very dynamic across very complicated real world operational environments, such as the two ports we mentioned. And it's how we make sense of all of that data to allow language models to sit above them, orchestrate and proactively communicate. So it's a very, very broad church, but the simple explanation of digital twin is it is a digital representation of a thing, process, or system.
Gemma, let's just focus on another revolution that's happening right now, and that's electrification. The net zero ambitions that are going to become so much more than ambitions, they're going to become reality in the coming years. How is AI being woven into that in a useful way?
Lots of different ways. As we've already said, the sort of planning around not just route optimization, but what vehicles can be utilized for those routes. So obviously, with the capacity now for batteries to enable longer routes through better efficiency and better charging structures, etc., there's a huge amount of AI being used in electrification planning, both in terms of what is deliverable on a route, both in terms of where and when charging can occur, with mapping of available charging, etc. But interestingly, also in relation to where you should actually build your um, operating sites based on the availability of the grid in that area, based on planning information and planning controls in that area, but also based on the resources that are available around that site. So, it could be a site that you need people to work in a warehouse or people to actually manufacture the product. That's going to have a certain amount of electrification needs. But equally, you might want somewhere that has, not too stringent planning controls. So, you can get the site up and running quickly, but then, you're going to need certain charging bays and access to grid infrastructure for that. So, there are actually models out there within the AI world where you can feed all this available data in, and it will tell you based on the size of the operation you need, number of vehicles, number of electrification points, etc., charging points, as to where would be the best site geographically for that site location. And it can take into account things such as predictive modeling around local routes, traffic, accessibility to other multimodal requirements, if you need access to trains or ports or air, whatever it is. So the electrification piece is fascinating, and there are so many different ways in which AI is having an impact, both in terms of the planning but also the deliverable around the electrification of those fleets and routes.
Toby, it strikes me that AI can seem to someone not really embracing it at the moment like a mountain to climb. But actually, once you're weaving AI in, it can help you come up with the answers to the other mountains coming, the major challenges for the logistics sector that really are just around the corner.
Yeah, yeah, 100. Just building on Gemma's previous point. I mean, when you hear that, and there's so much of this sort of stuff going on, it shifts the perspective of AI from being a threat to being the only way we can actually realistically achieve electrification, right? So there's always two sides to the coin. AI is threatening, but it's also a huge opportunity, and it's sometimes in some context, the only way that big visions like the electrification of fleets is realistically going to be achieved. But yeah, it can seem daunting. If you're looking at your business and thinking, okay, well, I need to do AI, that's a very, very broad and vague statement. So that the first thing to do is to start really zeroing in on where are the highest impact areas that you can deploy AI technology to realistically help. Is it the automation of certain workflows? Is it the generation of content? Is it, customer service, for example? So being the front of house, I would agree. No, and we've seen quite some very, very famous, very large companies fail in that context. But they're three options. Or is it actually using artificial intelligence to become a bit of a sort of intelligence layer across your organization? And that's plays to Gemma's point. It's exactly where Entropy has positioned itself. And then you start to say, okay, now I know what I want to do with AI. Let's run with the intelligence layer argument. What do I want intelligence over? Which part of my organization is the most critical to have that kind of capability? And that's quite easy to narrow down because you look at the highest impact, either cost, reputation, service, whatever the key drivers are. So you identify an area within that. And even once you've done that, that's probably still too big. So what you want to do is find another substrate within that value and start there. And by following that kind of very logical and systematic thought process, you're not well, very often you might be 60% right. It might not be the absolute home run day one, but you're going to be starting in an area that has links to the highest consequential area of your organization, highest cost line, highest reputational threat, whatever that might be, and you're starting small. And that means that you can deliver something tangible within a short period of time. And that's how you start to build momentum behind your AI journey. And this is what we advocate for with frankly anyone that will listen to us, because it's so important. You know, if you try and boil the ocean day one, everyone's going to become demotivated. You're not going to achieve anything. You're going to spend a huge amount of money, and the project will stall or fail. But actually, if you start small within the right area, within the right context, and you build that tangible kind of capability or tool in that defined substrate, it's actually much easier to get wider organizational buy-in. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a riff, but just to finish,
I don't
we
know. I agree, and I'm going to pick up on this, Toby.
okay, we often interact. A very common stakeholder group for us to interact with within a logistics organization or a port or an airport or an energy company is an innovation team, and typically we get the excited group within the organization about innovation, and there is always that group that they're so important because they're the guys that are going to bring the innovations into the organization, but they love the tech. And as soon as that tech hits the business, the entire profile of the conversation and scrutiny changes. I will always remember speaking to a chief operations officer, absolutely lovely person. But I remember vividly speaking about technology to that person, and it just going straight, in one ear out the other. There is zero reason to care. It doesn't tell that group of people why it matters. If the innovation teams can start thinking a little bit smaller, build something tangible, actually that's something tangible that can go into the business, and it's much easier for people to start understanding what it is first and foremost, and then caring about what it is, and then actually buying into what it is. So yeah, start small.
Completely agree. I think often people will look at AI as a huge concept and they will sort of start getting overly excited about it, etc., etc. Having deployed a number of AI projects within Logistics UK, I think the best advice I would give is start small, exactly as Toby said. Look at a specific project and have it on focused on sort of automating a very routine, something very manual, something, that's really menial, something that people don't like doing, but involves data entry, something very manual. Focus on something like that first. Use that as a project. Don't allow too many cooks to spoil the broth. That's a really key thing because people do get overexcited and then they go off on all sorts of tangents. And, you want one key project first, work on that, deliver that project, do your rave and grave analysis and all those things. Often, and I've seen it work really, really well, on the basis of that project being delivered successfully with good ROI and management around it and everything else, then you can look at other projects. And it might be something like tender management, procurement management, data entry on a specific manual task, or something where there's duplicate data entry across multiple systems. Go for something small, menial, something tedious that everyone hates doing, or there's a large amount of manual input in it. Do that one and then look at the others, and that's where you can sort of start to see things get a bit more exciting. That's our personal experience from my team.
Little steps get you underway on this journey. I think on that reassuring point, that's a good place to finish. Thank you so much for joining us. Gemma James and Toby Mills, thank you. Do look out for the latest Logistics UK Innovation Insight Report. It's just round the corner. We've just been chewing over a little part of it. There's so many pearls of wisdom within that report, and I look forward to being with you again with the next edition of Leading on Logistics, which is a Broadcast Revolution production for Logistics UK.